שמי דוד גולינקין, ברוכים הבאים לכנס הראשון, ואני מקווה לא האחרון, על מדינת ישראל ויהדות צפון אמריקה, כיצד נוכל לגשר על הפערים, מטעם ה-Jewish בית המדרש של הרבנים ומכון שכטר. אנחנו אומרים לקהל בבית, שלום לצופים בנו בשידור חי באינטרנט. אנו מזמינים את הגולשים בבית לשלוח לנו שאלות לדוברים השונים. היכנסו לעמוד הפייסבוק של שכטר בעברית ובאנגלית, וכתבו בתגובות לפוסט של השידור החי בפייסבוק את שאלותיכם. אנו נבחר כמה שאלות עליהן יגיבו הדוברים בסיום כל מושב. בפתח דבריי אני רוצה להגיד כמה מילים על אנו יודעים מתולדות עמנו שפילוג מוביל לאסון, לחורבן ולגלות. זהו הלקח של סיפור יוסף ואחיו ושל גלות 10 השבטים, וזהו הלקח של סיפור המכבים. לפי ספר מכבים ב', גזירות אנטיוכוס נגרמו על ידי שנאת חינם במנהיגי האומה שזממו זה נגד זה ללא הרף. וכן אנו לומדים מן התלמוד הבבלי ממסכת יומא, אבל מקדש שני שהיו עוסקים בתורה ובמצוות וגמילות חסדים מפני מה חרב? מפני שהייתה בו שנאת חינם. וכן משתמע מאגדות החורבן במסכת גיטין וממלחמות היהודים של יוסף בן מתתיהו. מצד שני, אנו יודעים מהמקורות שלנו על החשיבות של אחדות עם ישראל. וכן אנו לומדים במסכת ברכות דף ו' עמוד א', התפילין של אדון העולם, מה כתוב בהם? כן? אתם לא ידעתם, אבל הקדוש ברוך הוא מניח תפילין כל בוקר. מה כתוב בתפילין שלו? ומי כעמך ישראל גוי אחד בארץ. וכך ניבא הנביא יחזקאל את איחודן מחדש של ממלכות יהודה וישראל. כה אמר אדוני אלוהים, הנה אני לוקח את בני ישראל מבין הגויים, וקיבצתי אותם מסביב והבאתי אותם אל אדמתם, ועשיתי אותם לגוי אחד בארץ. אני חושב שכל יהודי שאכפת לו מאחדות עם ישראל, אינו אלא יכול לדאוג מהתופעות שקרו בעם ישראל בשנים האחרונות, כשיש פילוג הולך וגובר בין יהדות ישראל ויהדות התפוצות, ובמיוחד ליהדות ארצות הברית. וכן אני שמחתי מאוד בחודש ספטמבר, כשפרופסור ארני אייזן, הנגיד של JTS בניו יורק, פנה אלינו, והציע שאנחנו נקיים כנס כאן בירושלים עיר הקודש במכון שכטר, כדי לדון בנושא החשוב של אחדות עם ישראל, אחדות יהדות ישראל ויהדות התפוצות. ולכן אנחנו שמחים לפתוח את הכנס הזה. אנחנו מודים לפרופסור אייזן ולעוד הרבה אנשים שתכף תשמעו את שמותיהם. וברגע זה יש לי את הכבוד להציג את פרופסור ארני אייזן, הנגיד של ה-Jewish Theological Seminary.
Thank you, David. I'm very happy to be here with you in Jerusalem today, with all of you here in this room and those who join us via live streaming in New York and all over the world. I'd like to give you belated greetings and congratulations. Chag Sameach. We have representatives from JTS here, members of the board, members of the faculty, Jack Wertheimer, Jill Roth, Judy Hauptman, Barry Holtz. They all came, especially Jill Roth is here for the semester, but the others made the trip especially to be here today at this conference to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut, the Day of Independence of the State of Israel, marking 70 years of independence. We recited the prayer of Hallel about 10 days ago on Yom Ha'atzmaut, and we said how good is our lot and how pleasant. We have a pleasant life. We lead a pleasant life. This is not just something that we recite in blessings. It's true because we have the ability, the possibility of living in this time of the renewal of the State of Israel. The late Chancellor Gerson Cohen asked Shimon Greenberg, after Cohen was appointed Chancellor, asked him to look into the possibility of having a Beit Midrash of JTS in Jerusalem. And in fact, in 1984, a Beit Midrash was established. First, it was held in the Shoken Institute, and eventually it became the Schechter Institute. I have here a copy of the memo that Greenberg sent Cohen in July 1974. He envisioned the establishment of a center for the study of theological and philosophical issues that Judaism encounters in a Beit Midrash atmosphere that will develop into something bigger than just one department. This was the initiative of the JTS here in Israel. In addition to the rabbinical students who were here from the JTS, they had been coming for many years to spend a year here in Israel. This new program reflects the fact that we regard the basic unity between Israelis and world Jewry as a deep-seated part of our heritage. And he added at the time that this ongoing unity of our people ultimately depends on searching jointly for answers to the basic challenges that Judaism deals with. Indeed, this is the very topic that we will be discussing here today at this conference. Our question is, how can we search together for answers to those basic challenges that Judaism copes with? It's not surprising that Israelis perceive the Jewish world differently than do Jews in North America. Despite the common ground, and there is, of course, common ground, there are significant deep-seated differences. A state is not a voluntary community. A small minority, less than 2% of the general population, is totally different from the overwhelming majority in a sovereign state. The state of Israel and Eretz Israel are certainly at the heart of the culture in North America. The state of Israel takes a marginal role in North America, not a central one, and perhaps the same thing can be said for culture. The State of Israel is culturally marginal to the cultural identity of Jews in North America. I think this can be said too for the identity of traditional Jews, conservative Jews, vis-a-vis the traditional Jews here in Israel. Let us investigate these questions here today. Let's ask, what are the challenges we face, the halachic challenges here in Israel and in the U.S.? What are the challenges that we face as educators here in Israel vis-a-vis educators in America? There is a lot of common ground. There is also a lot that is different. This is what we'll be discussing here today. We hope we'll be talking with resolution, determination, hope, and passion to find a way to bridge the gaps, or at least, at the very least, to open an ongoing conversation on the basic issues that we face on both sides. Otherwise, society here in Israel will develop in one direction, while the Jewish community in the U.S. will be developing in a totally different direction. And without a conversation between the two, we will simply drift apart, further and further apart. And this is simply inconceivable. We are here today to celebrate together, to think together, to dream together, and perhaps even to plan together. I would like to end by thanking David Golinkin and the team of the Schechter Institute for enabling us to hold this conference and for organizing everything. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Eisen. I would now like to call upon Professor Doron Bar, the President of the Schechter Institute for Jewish Studies. Thank you, Professor David Golinkin. Thank you, Professor Arnie Eisen, Chancellor of the JTS. There's no doubt that all of us here are happy and proud. We are marking with great pride not just the fact that we are celebrating 70 years of independence in Israel, we are also celebrating the deep ties between Israel and American Jewry and the ties between the Schechter Institute and the JTS. It is symbolic that one institute is in New York and the other in Jerusalem. These are two important centers, historic centers of Judaism and its various activities over the years and the generations. Just as the visionaries who thought up the idea of the State of Israel would be amazed to see the actual State of Israel and see what a huge success it is, so too would the flourishing JTS and Schechter Institute be a credit to the founding fathers. This is a pluralistic, liberal atmosphere enabling people from all walks of life, every type of person and student to come participate. Go back 30, 40 years, we would be looking at a little building perched on a hilltop, a few dozen students, that's all. Now when we are talking about the end of the second decade of the millennium, hundreds of students come to the schools, the curriculum, the Bet Midrash. We even have students from abroad, from the US, South America, and other places. The vision of the founding fathers and mothers has now come true. They made their mark. We are a constant presence on the Israeli scene and a bridgehead for ties between Israel and the diaspora. I want to devote a few words to the fascinating topic that we will be addressing, Israel and the Jews of North America. The question is, how can we lessen the widening gaps between the two communities? In 1837, a young man came to Jerusalem named Moshe Aaron. He was about 30, 35 years old. He went to Tzfat and then to Jerusalem. Nobody knows about his origins. Kremzin, near Brno in the Czech Republic of today. This was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He came to Jerusalem, lived in the Muslim quarter, then in the Jewish quarter. His children moved to Western Jerusalem. They lived in Mea Shearim, then to the Batei Ungarin, Mea Shearim community, then to Geula. Why am I telling you of Moshe Aaron? Baumgarten was his last name. He was my mother's great-great-great-grandfather, and he traversed Europe and came eventually to Jerusalem. He wasn't a Zionist. Zionism didn't even exist at the time. He was a scholar. He studied and wanted to realize in person. Next year we will celebrate in Jerusalem, that we say in our prayers. What would have happened had he not decided to realize his dream and come to Jerusalem? What would the Baumgarten family look like today? What did they do at the end of the 19th century that changed our lives? Would they go to Ellis Island, to America? Would they have ended up in the Lower East Side, Buenos Aires? They might have stayed in Moravia. They could never have anticipated the Holocaust that happened 100 years after Moshe Aaron left his place of birth. Is this Zionism? Is this fate? Is this the destiny? In Genesis, God tells Abraham to leave his home, leave his father's house, leave his country, and go to the place God decides to show him. We are still talking about the place the Jews should be. Should everybody leave their home and come to Israel, make Aliyah, and establish the Jewish homeland here in the state of Israel, in Eretz Israel? Most Israelis and most classic Zionists thought, yes, that all Jews must come to Israel. I don't think so. I am a Zionist. I was born here in Jerusalem. I love this country despite all its problems, but I am not convinced that the one and only legitimate place in the world for Jews is here in Israel. Jews have led such a complex life and have had such a complex history. Some places flourished. Judaism is changing and being molded even as we speak. There are still places where Jewish life is endangered, at risk. There is anti-Semitism and other problems. But we must remember that the State of Israel is not the only solution to the question of continuity of the Jewish people. There's about 150 years here of renewed life, as opposed to hundreds and hundreds of years of Jewish life throughout history. We do not have any kind of monopoly on the Jewish people. All over the world in Jewish communities, Jews mold their identities, their cultural, religious, and intellectual identity. Throughout generations, Jews were open to their surroundings, influenced them, and were influenced by them, and developed as a result. Unfortunately, here in Israel, we are witnessing the opposite trend. We are becoming more and more closed and withdrawn, turning inward. This trend is no less dangerous than external threats to Jewish lives and the continuity of the Jewish people. For that reason, this conference is so important. There's no doubt that this issue and other issues that we'll be dealing with will highlight the points that we share. I know that we will be discussing the connections between Jews here in Israel and abroad, and we will focus on North American Jews. This hopefully will be the first of a series of sessions dealing with Israel and its ties with the diaspora and the question of how to bridge the gaps. I too would like to thank all those who made this conference possible. I thank our sponsors, JTS and the Schechter Institute, Mr. Robert Bob Rifkind, Mary Sanders, and all the others. I thank them for their generosity. I thank everybody who made this conference possible. Professor Arnie Eisen and Professor David Golinkin, who worked so hard at organizing the conference, Moria Karsagi Aaron, the producer, Dr. Simcha Goldschmidt, Vicky, Rabbi Deutsch, Dr. Ackerman, Dr. Leibovich, and Doron Sagir. And I thank all the speakers who will be participating here today, with special thanks to the professors from JTS who came especially to be with us, Professor Arnie Eisen, Professor Judith Hauptmann, Professor Barry Holtz, and Professor Jack Wertheimer. May we all enjoy many more years of flourishing state of Israel. Here at the Schechter Institute and at JTS, we deal with similar issues and problems to enrich Jewish life, Jewish intellectual life, and Jewish culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bar. And now the speakers from the first session, please come to the stage. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Ari Ackerman, the moderator. He's the Dean of the Schechter Institute of Jewish Studies. Good afternoon. And welcome to the first session on Jewish education as part of this joint conference of the Schechter Institute and the JTS on the connection between Israel and the Jews of Northern America. When we sat together, representatives of the Institute and representatives of JTS, and we deliberated over which topics are appropriate for a joint conference that's celebrating 70 years of Israel's independence, we reached the conclusion quite quickly that we should dedicate the conference to rethinking together about the problems between the relationships between Israel and the Jews of the diaspora, and I think that we were right. It seems that there is interest in this problem. It's a problem that concerns us all, and that is the deteriorating relationship between Israel and the diaspora, especially recently the problems in the relationships between the two largest Jewish communities in the world, the Jewish community in Israel and the Jewish community in North America. And although the relationships between these communities always suffered conflict and communication problems, we are now facing an era that is especially challenging. We might say that the foundations of the relationship that existed beforehand are no longer relevant, and it is possible that the title, Bridging the Gaps, is too delicate because we might actually have to change the paradigm. The way we define the problem and the way we imagine the solution, it was clear to us that the solution has to address the field of education, both in Israel and in North America. Just like any problem that is faced by the Jewish world, if we want to reach a sustainable solution, a deep solution, then we need the educational system has to be recruited in order to cope with the problem, which is why it was important to us to open the conference with a discussion on Jewish education. And we gathered 4 educators, very senior educators, who are involved in both theory and practice of Jewish education. Each is active in at least one of these centers, and we asked them to express their opinion on what can be derived of Jewish education in order to cope with the problems with the relationship between the Jews of Israel and the Jews of the diaspora. I asked each speaker to speak for only 15 minutes in order to leave time for questions and discussion. And at this point, I would like to also invite those that are joining us online to send in questions to the different speakers. You can access our Facebook page in either English or Hebrew. Write comments on the live stream of this conference on Facebook. Type in your questions, and we will collect all of the questions and address them at the end of the session. We'll take a few questions from the audience at home. I will introduce each of the speakers separately. Each speaker has a very impressive resume, but I will try to be concise in order to save time and introduce and present only the relevant information. The first speaker is Dr. Eitan Chikli. Dr. Chikli is a leader and executive director of the TALI Education Fund since 1994. In addition, he completed PhD in the joint program between the Schechter Institute and JTS on the history of education in Israel. He's a lecturer in the Schechter Institute and in other institutions. Good afternoon. I was given an extra 2 minutes beyond the time that everyone else has in order to present someone, the principal managers and colleagues, that is very related to our program. We're talking about a group of 19 principals who spend 3 days each month. At the end of their workday, they study until late at night. At the end of the school year, this will be not 3 days a month, 3 days a week. You might wish it was 3 days a month. Strike that. They will spend a week. They will spend a week in New York, meeting the Jewish community in New York. I would like to add one sentence. One of the principals from this group is missing today. Ms. Sarit Angel is sitting Shiva for her daughter, or Angel, who was killed in the horrible, tragic flood incident. I would like to dedicate this session to the memory of this child, as her family talked about how the unity of the Jewish people was so important to her. We all feel very close to Sarit, who is missing, who is absent today. Okay, so now you could start the clock now. It's very important to begin this session with a methodological introduction. I will want to refer to an article that I wrote on Ynet and another article that will be published in English in the near future. Some of the things that I say may sound insulting to some of our brethren in the United States. I have no intention of insulting anyone or of hurting anyone. Everything that I say today comes from my feeling of love and caring and desire to draw others closer. People like myself, and as everyone has said so far, we have a very deep debt to the Jews of the United States for their support, for their philanthropy. There are hundreds of organizations that play a very, very important role in the state of Israel, and therefore every word that I say is full of respect and honor. However, I believe that dialogue means sharing genuine thoughts. I cannot speak on behalf of the Israelis, just as no one else can. I want to present a voice that is, when it's heard from politicians, it sounds terrible. Their attack to think of M.K. Chotoveli and others. This is very damaging. But however, I want to try to reflect the religious perspective on the one hand, the role in the context of Jewish education and its role in bridging the gap between the state of Israel and the Jews of North America. The question is, what is the gap? What is bothering us? What is the problem? From the American perspective, I might say that there are two main things that concern our brethren in the United States. First of all, it is the insulting and discriminating approach to the liberal denominations in the state of Israel. It is humiliating. It is an insulting attitude. Their leadership is not acknowledged. Their rabbis are not recognized, and this is a shame for all of us. Another problem is the perspective, what we as Israelis do. Who do we elect? What the policies that the Israeli government implements? It seems that most of our brethren in the United States that belong to the Democratic Party or are close to the Democratic Party and are driven by humanistic, universal principles, it's very difficult for them to see the pictures that are taken in Israel as they appear in the United States. It's painful for them, and that creates tension between us. This was reflected in an article written by Ron Lauder about a month ago. And if you can just move ahead with in the presentation, this is what Ron Lauder wrote in his article that was published in the United States. He said that part of the assimilation in the United States is the result of the Jews' disappointment in the policy of the Israeli government. So this is usually the parameter that we focus on when we talk about the relationship between the Jews in Israel and the Jews in the United States. And I wanted to try to present another aspect of this conflict, of this tension, and that is how the way that people in the Jews of the United States act cause the Jews in Israel to distance themselves from them. We always talk about why Israel is at fault, and in my opinion, it's very important to also understand what about the attitude of the American Jewry causes young Jews in Israel to be either indifferent to what happens there or to be antagonistic about it. And I am basing my opinion on conversations that I have had. It's very important to me. It's very important to the TALI Fund as an educational institute. It's important for the principals that will visit the United States. We want to enrich them with this dialogue, with this narrative, and I want to present my insights to you. The first thing is, of course, and I'm going to sound like David Ben-Gurion, the first thing is the old Zionist ethos. You'll be surprised to hear that a lot of Israelis are still pained by the fact that half of the Jewish nation is not actually involved, not only financial involvement, but not actually involved in the incredible chapter of the history of the Jewish people, the most incredible chapter over the last 2,000 years. It's painful for me. It's painful to many people in this auditorium that community lives abroad. Because beyond the fact that you're not here to help us resolve some of our problems, it sends a message to our enemies that the state of Israel is nice to have, but it's not a necessity. Look how happy and flourishing and successful we are abroad. Just one, that's the first point to ponder. The second point is that not only is this an issue of reality, but a new ideology is being developed. Not only are we happy abroad and it's difficult for us to leave, there's an entire ideology around this. I read a book by my colleague and professor about people who follow this ideology. What I'm showing here on the slide is something from the most popular Jewish newspaper in the United States, with about 1.5 million readers, in honor of Israel's Independence Day. This was its title. It's time for Israel to recognize that the diaspora Jews are already home. This is insulting. began by asking you not to be insulted, but I was almost insulted by this headline. It says that diaspora is a good thing; it's thriving, and what can you do? But a lot of the Jews in Israel, we hear about what happens to Jews around the world. Just this week, we heard what the German Chancellor said in Germany about the petition signed by Sarkozy in France, about the laws in Scandinavia to try to prohibit Brit Milah and kashrut. This is something that makes Israelis who live in Israel feel terrible. They don't understand why you live there, and if that's the way the American population looks at the diaspora, then they're blind. The third point that I would like to make is that depending on the party or the faction that we belong to, what some of the Israelis feel it's difficult for Israelis to accept the fact that not all Jews participate in the burden of defending the country. Our friends, our family, our fathers, our brothers, our sons all serve in the army. We all know how difficult it is. It is very easy to be critical. We heard the Pope recommend that the entire world lay down its arms. Of course, that sounds wonderful. Of course, I'm in favor of peace. The diaspora likes to preach to sounds like it preaches to the world. As Professor Eisen said, we're a people of the book, but I also learned that Judaism is not only ideology, it's also actions. And here we're talking about actions, difficult actions, and all of Jewish morality is challenged each and every day. We face very difficult challenges, and I think it's very difficult for us to accept criticism in this field. Another issue that distances Israeli Jews from the American Jewry is the horrible assimilation in the United States and in the diaspora in general. Here on the screen, you can see results of the Pew recent study from 2013. The percentage of intermarriage, if you ignore the Orthodox population where there's very little intermarriage, we're talking about 70% intermarriage among American Jewry. You can say, who cares? During my last visit to the United States, I met a lot of people who said, okay, and so what? It's not a big deal. So there'll be 2 million Jews less. It hurts me. It pains me to hear that because I care. I'm not trying to teach them a lesson, but it hurts me. It's painful for me, and I think it's very painful for a lot of Israelis. The Jews of the United States are gradually disappearing. Do you want us to be indifferent? Does it sound like we're trying to be critical? I share the pain. Some leaders present that as an opportunity. Israelis cannot understand that. And the last thing, as something that distances Israelis from their brethren in the United States, is the attempt of some of the Jewish leadership to talk about the dual centrality of the Jewish nation. But in order to guarantee the future of the Jewish people, it is that the community in the United States is almost equal to the existence of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. And this is very difficult for many Israelis to hear. These are my insights on the gaps between Israeli Jews and American Jewry. And once you understand where the gap is, you understand why education is so complicated. So what can contribute to Jewish education? I'll leave that to my colleagues from JTS to talk about the challenges of Jewish education in the United States. I can't try to talk about that, but the role of Jewish education is to keep the Jews Jews. That's something that I understand very clearly. Another thing that may connect to my final sentence, don't only tell them about Israel, maybe maybe incorporate Zionism into some of your curriculums. I want to focus on the state of Israel and to try to understand what is the right thing for Jewish education to do, and especially what my organization is trying to do. I think that Jewish education in both of the communities should create a common denominator between the two. When there are children in two parts of the world that speak a common language, I wish how wonderful it would be for everyone to speak Hebrew. But fewer and fewer children in the United States speak Hebrew. They used to teach Hebrew in schools, learning the Hebrew language, connect the language that the children speak, create a shared culture for children. The state of Israel, learning about the state of Israel, in Israel we have to learn about the very existence of a Jewish diaspora. We have to create a common denominator of familiarity with one another. In the state of Israel, I want to emphasize 2 or 3 things, and then I want to talk about things that we tried to do but that didn't necessarily work. The state of Israel, I think that TALI is a system that is inspired by education in the United States. The TALI Education Fund includes over 300 institutes, including preschools and schools. We were inspired by Solomon Schechter School in the United States. The parents that founded TALI were American parents who immigrated to Israel and contributed to Israeli society. They paved the golden path between Orthodox and conservative Judaism. That was the idea, the idea of TALI. The idea was that Jews, in the most natural way, lived in a pluralist environment with moderate, tolerant, inclusive Judaism, and they came to a very extreme society in Israel and realized that an institute of this kind didn't exist. What they did was they came and they turned on the light. They established an incredible system that now includes thousands of students. TALI is the initiative of American Jews who came to Israel. Michal Berman, head of the Panim organization, also joined. Many other organizations joined this initiative. The Organization for Jewish Rebirth was also joined. And they incorporated the concept of religious pluralism into Israeli society, which used to be a completely foreign concept. So this is an excellent example of what American Aliyah can do for the state of Israel. This is a system that is just at the beginning of being reinforced and strengthened. Jewish education in Israel, and I read an abstract of a lecture on this topic by Professor Eisen, who wrote how important it is for us to speak with our colleagues. And for the next 2 minutes, I want to talk about 2 attempts that are related to this. One attempt is a program called Friends Over the Sea. Many of you are familiar with this program. Its goal is to cause the children on both sides of the ocean to understand that there are Jews on either side and that we have to care about one another. And this is a program that is running in several dozen TALI schools, but in the United States, they don't have the time to run this program because between Hebrew studies and basic and general studies, they don't have time. And it's very difficult for us to find schools in the United States that can join us in this initiative. A second program has several representatives here. Next year, we will send 70 TALI educators to the United States. Some believe that meeting others brings people together. That might be true, but it doesn't always work. And I'm very serious. Sometimes, and I quote a principal who just happened to have called me this morning to tell me that she's recently incorporated TALI into her high school. She's the principal of a very large high school in Ma'alot. we wanted to bring people together, but we failed. She said, Eitan, I was very excited about the struggle for survival of the schools in the United States. We saw very prestigious institutes, JTS, other schools. It's very exciting to see. We visited synagogues and we saw Israeli flags, and our heart is with Israel. We cannot help but be moved by the love that the American Jews express towards Israel. But in summary, when I asked the principals what they learned, one of the most intelligent principals said, Eitan, I don't want to learn anything from American Jewry. This proximity, the visit, actually increased the distance between the two. But I still think it's very important to bring people together, for people to meet each other, even for the sake of getting to know one another and disagreeing, so we know what we disagree on. And just one last sentence before I give the stage to the next speaker. I look at our future with a lot of hope and a lot of fear. I'm afraid of the two things that I fear the most are the ultra-Orthodox trend in the state of Israel and assimilation in the United States. These are two very dangerous situations. And as I wrote both in Hebrew and in English, I said that if 500,000 young American Jews make Aliyah, this will change the balance in Israel. It will change change the leadership in Israel, and I think it will also resolve part of the assimilation process. May this come true.
Thank you, Dr. Chikli, for these thought-provoking remarks. When we planned this session, I was worried that it would be sleepy, boring, there wouldn't be anything that could spark a discussion, an argument. I'm not worried anymore now, following Eitan's talk. Our next speaker is Dr. Beverly Gribetz, who was the principal of the Ramaz School in New York. She founded the Tehillah Secondary School in Jerusalem, and she is now the principal of the Evelina the Rothschild School in Jerusalem. She has a PhD in Jewish education from JTS, and recently she was awarded the Solomon Schechter Award for outstanding work in Jewish education in Israel and overseas.
Okay, Ari, with your permission, I'm going to switch and speak in English, even though it undermines my message where in the United States I am still battering one or two schools about the loss of Hebrew, which is our common language. But when I understood the streaming and my terrible accent, I can explain more in English, although I could do it in Hebrew as well. Lower the microphone. Yes, I understood every word that he said. Okay. But I'm going to talk to a different topic, or a portion of the topic. The question was, how do the two centers, or how can the two centers relate to each other from the point of view of the institution where I work? I work in high school. I have spent close to my whole life with girls and boys, now only girls, who are between the ages of 12 and 18. Teenagers, that's what I know best, and I know what they do in schools. I don't go beyond that. What? Okay. What I want to do is talk about two things. One is how do the two centers relate to each other on the level of teenagers, and the other is the track or the trajectory that is vastly different for kids who are aged 12 to 18 here in Israel and kids who are aged 12 to 18 in North America, what they are preparing for, what they are thinking about because of what they are preparing for, what comes next, which is what informs their entire life in that time span. The ages of 12 to 18 are the longest 6 years in life. And those of us who work with them, and I know there are others in this room, have to have tremendous, tremendous patience. Orach ruach. What you see when you interview a sixth grader is not what that child will look like when he or she is in 11th or 12th grade. And in order to give an example, I want to tell you what I did today. Every day I do something interesting. Today I did something totally new that I had never done before. And I often think that how could it be? I am so many years in this business, and because of a little quirk in Israel, I am near the end of my career. And how could it be that something brand new today? So this is what the story is. There is an organization called Kav Lezinuk. Jumping line, it's in sports. Yeah, but the starting line, right? It's where you jump over the sand. Okay. And it is funded by the Rothschild Foundation from Caesarea. They hadn't worked in Jerusalem before. They came into Jerusalem this year. They run a program that follows kids from grade 10 for the next 10 years of their lives through their high school and then service and into the army. And what they are looking for, the ones who are in Jewish Zionist day schools, and there are others who are getting the Jewish education in the synagogue, in the camp, in the youth movement, and on Israel trips. My impression is, you people know the statistics better than I do, that most American Jewish teenagers are not getting any kinds of Jewish education, hence the great success or draw of Birthright, but which is still very limited. And then they get to the campus where it seems to us here that all hell is breaking loose, that it's... there are people sitting here who I'm sure got all the emails from Barnard this past week, which was something we never thought we'd live to see. Now, Israeli teenagers, while they're in high school, have very little contact with American teachers. The youth trips where sometimes Israelis are invited, we sent a girl on Bronfman, but we once had Camp La Vie sponsor 10 of our girls to go to camp. But that's very, very limited, very small. Most Israeli teenagers will not experience any kinds of mifgash with Americans while they're in the high school age. We had a trip once to New York that was funded. It was absolutely fantastic. I have a dream. I spoke to Arnie once a little bit about this, instead of, in addition to taking kids to Poland to see what was, to see a very vibrant Jewish life that is. And I could lead a trip to that just in Manhattan and the Bronx, and it would be a lot less busing than what we do in Poland. What the kids hear, what teenagers hear about America is what Netanyahu in the news wants to hear. Trump is fantastic. He's moving the embassy. And that's what it is. The interest that teenagers have in Aliyah from elsewhere is where the Aliyah is coming from, which is right now mostly France. We are Beit Sefer Kolet Aliyah. Olim girls who get to Jerusalem get their Ulpan hours. They can choose to come either to our school, which is a little more modern. They can choose the Masorti or us or Chorev. And then they get their Ulpan hours and they integrate into high school. Right now, those who are coming are mostly French. Prior to this, there were Ethiopians. They're coming from other places in Europe. There is hardly any teenage Aliyah from North America, and if it is Dati. And my own position, despite what Dr. Chikli said, is that Aliyah for teenagers is so difficult that if you are of the 500,000 who are considering Aliyah, you come before your children are 11, or you wait till they're 18 and they can go to a midrasha. I think we do a great job with the Olim who come at age 12, 13, 14, 15, but it is not simple. students here, high school students here, learn very little American history, very little American Jewish history, almost nothing unless they're in the Megama. And the average American Jewish teenager isn't learning much Israeli history unless they are in a Jewish school that emphasizes that. And if the Americans are interested, they're also hearing the news, and then they're going to campus. Now, a word about the maslul, okay? In Israel, Jewish education is public school. There are Dati schools, there are Chiloni schools, they're all giving a Jewish education, but it is public school. It is funded by the government to this level or that level. American Jewish education is private school. Now I'm talking about the day schools. It is private school and doesn't have to live under any kinds of government rules, very little, very little. Now, American Jewry has reached a point, and I want to say this in a good way because I am also a product from way back of this, and I don't want to say middle or upper middle class and refer to money. I know that there are poor Jews in the United States, but the American Jewish community is tremendously well educated. I dare say there is not a Jewish teenager in the United States now whose parents did not go to college. I mean, maybe there's some rare case, but also because in the United States there are so many levels of colleges, anybody can go to college and get a BA. Most of their grandparents went to college, and there are some, like my nieces and nephews are next generation, that their great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, right? My grandmother is a graduate of the TI. So that's my niece's great-great-grandparents in the United States of America. In Israel, and this is something that I personally suffer from, although I spoke to my teachers about this last week and they told me to stop suffering. If people came, the people who went to the United States, either at the beginning of the 20th century, like my family, or prior to World War II, like most of my friends, or after World War II, after the Shoah, like some of my friends, if they went to the United States, by now they have had tremendous opportunities. But if those same people came here to Israel, especially if they came from Eastern countries, many of them have not yet had the same opportunities. I interview children in 6th grade whose parents are barely 40 and they barely have 12 years of education. They finished a bagrut. A generation ago, they might not have finished a bagrut. They are working in jobs where they have a maslul kidum. They can be promoted. They are making money. But what I think about is they came here and something different happened. I have 2 other faculty members in the school who are the same age. I have 3 others who are the same age as I am. One of them grew up in Tel Aviv in a fancy apartment and had every advantage and always tells us how then B'nai Akiva had mixed dancing. The other two were born in Ma'abarot. And when I think the 2 of them were a Tanakh teacher and the Yoetzet, they were both born in Ma'abarot. Now, they're both fantastic, fantastic people, and they have stories about the day their father realized they had to go out of the Ma'abara and they had to go to university, and they ended up with the same education that I have. But when I think that in the 1950s, they were sitting in a Ma'abara, and we were sitting in that nice house in Riverdale that we went to because my parents couldn't afford to go to Manhattan because they were poor, Ke'ilu. It is very hard for me to get my head around it, and I think it's important at some point for the kids to know about this, and now I'll just get to my last point, what they're preparing for. Our students are preparing for service to the state. That's what they're preparing for. They want to have a complete bagrut because they want to have the opportunity to go to university, because I tell them that. But that's not their major motivator. High school is all about what army or Sherut Leumi are you going to get into, especially in 11th and 12th grade. And some of them defer and go to the mechinot and the midrashot and everything that you've heard about this past week. In the United States, what children are going through in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade in our day schools or in the fancy public school, wherever the Jews are, it would be very hard for my Israeli students to understand. Okay, just two examples. Once upon a time, a close friend of mine called me on the phone a few years after I had left Ramaz. She was still a Ramaz parent. She said, Beverly, he got a 70 in math in 10th grade. His life is over. His life is over, right? Because in America, it's not the average. They look at the transcript of every semester. Okay, his life wasn't over, but you see what the point is. Israel is the land of second chances. You can take your bugword over, and you can do it over again, and you can do it over again, and you can do it over again. So there's no such thing as 10th grade, your life is over. And the other story is just from a few weeks ago. I don't know if Ed even knows this. I was speaking to a very close cousin of mine who lives in Manhattan, and her daughter is in 12th grade in the other place, H. And she said yesterday she was accepted, early decision, to the college of her choice. Today her personality came back. My cousin said to me, remember her nice personality before her bat mitzvah? Today, her personality came back. Okay, now, I understand it. I understand it because I understand that you want to get ahead and et cetera, but it is a very different track for teenagers. One thing that has changed a little bit, and this is my last point, when I first came to Evelina and I had to learn all about Sephardim, because we didn't have Sephardim in New York then, we had Syrians in Brooklyn. Now, actually, I say to their credit, they call me from Ramaz to help them understand, and it is a little bit different culture, the Iranians and a lot of other types of Jews. I mean, the fact that Ramaz now has a Sephardi minyan is something unbelievably amazing and good. And when we took our girls to visit Ramaz, they had the opportunity to choose the Ashkenazi minyan or the Sephardi minyan, which was a very big thing for them. So that's what I have to say from the point of view of somebody who has been in high school for a very, very long time. And there are a lot of people here who also have a lot to say about this and know more than I do. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Beverly, for that fascinating comparison. Our third speaker is Professor Barry Holtz, the Baumreiter Professor of Jewish Education at JTS. Professor Holtz was Dean of Jewish Education at JTS from 2008 to 2013 and has recently published a book on Rabbi Akiva at Yale University Press.
Good afternoon. So the first piece of advice I'll give to you is try very hard not to be on a program where you follow Beverly Gribetz. So what can I say? Now, I have prepared remarks on the topic at hand. I wasn't planning when I packed to bring a shield with me, and therefore I'm a little unclear whether I shall scrap this and try to address Dr. Chikli's de Tocquevillian survey of American Jews. I will indirectly relate to a little bit of that. There's one thing that I just would say in advance. When I came to the seminary to work there 40 years ago. It was my great privilege to come to JTS when the Chancellor of the seminary was Dr. Gerson Cohen of blessed memory. And I was thinking of Dr. Cohen as Dr. Chikli was speaking, and one of his quite remarkable essays called The Blessings of Assimilation, in which, as arguably the greatest historian of his generation, Dr. Cohen laid out his views about the way that Jews have always managed to live in other cultures, to help those cultures advance, and to be influenced by those cultures in ways that are powerful and the effects of which we ourselves feel today. But enough of that. The word gap in the title of this conference already assumes that there is a gap, but it doesn't tell us what the nature of that gap might be. To ask the question, how can we bridge the gap between Israel and North America through the means of education, throws out a challenge to educators, both here and in America. And it is not unlike other uses of education as a resource of social engineering, a term I use in a positive sense, though it may sometimes have negative overtones in other contexts. The track record of education and social engineering is a mixed bag, because the influence of education on human behaviors and attitudes is less powerful than we might hope. Getting people to wear seatbelts in cars, very successful. Getting people to stop smoking, fairly successful. Getting people to love their neighbors as themselves, sadly, not so successful. But the reason why we turn to education as a means of social change is precisely because we have so few other means to do so. Therefore, if we understand better what we mean by gap, perhaps we might have a better chance of understanding how much education could help in bridging that gap. Let me try out a few ideas. We might suggest that this gap is essentially a gap of knowledge on both sides. The American side vis-a-vis Israel, the Israeli side vis-a-vis America. In some ways, this portrait of a binary knowledge gap is accurate, but in other ways it is misleading. Because the nature of knowledge, when applied to what American Jews know about Israel, is of a different sort than the lack of knowledge that Israelis have about America. Here is a hypothesis. This is not based on research, but on my own anecdotal and personal experience. American Jewish adults know a certain amount about Israel, perhaps through their Jewish education in a formal context, perhaps through reading the newspaper, and some of this Beverly alluded to, perhaps by visiting Israel, perhaps even through their rabbi's sermons. This knowledge may be broad, but it is not very deep. Some of this may be what I call sentimental knowledge. That is, the Israel of kibbutzim, orange groves, and dancing the hora. For younger American Jewish adults, it's about what they learned, there are air quotes around the word learned here, in 10 days on a birthright trip. For somewhat more engaged or sophisticated adults, the knowledge, for better or worse, is about the Middle East conflict, the peace process, the Palestinians, etc. For a smaller number, the knowledge might be about the religious differences between American Judaism's landscape and the majority of religious Jews in Israel. Once again, this is not likely to be deep knowledge, but it is what North American Jews will think about if Israel is the topic. And this applies to people no matter where they stand on the political spectrum. Their conclusions may be different, but the facts remain the same. The problem for American Jewish educators is answering the following question. What really is the topic that should be at the heart of any curriculum about Israel? Is it Israel in the current events sense? Is it Israel in classic Zionist theory? Is it Israel within Israel's internal politics or Israeli culture or Israeli technology? Is it the Eretz Yisrael of the Bible? For a certain segment of non-Orthodox American Jews, knowledge about religious life in Israel will matter a lot. The issue of egalitarianism, women at the kotel, issues about marriage and divorce, conversion to Judaism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't have to review this for this audience. I can't give you any numbers, but we all know that when conservative or Reform Jews come to Israel or read about these matters back in the United States, they feel perplexed or alienated. Most of all, they feel the gap because of the power of the Rabbanut here, and they feel alienated because of having been raised in a culture in which church, in quotes, and state are separate. In this case, we have to admit, sometimes a gap is really a gap. But what about the other side, Israelis' knowledge about America? And here I would say is where the imbalance is most clearly seen. American Jews knew a little bit about a lot of things concerning Israel. But I would suggest that Israelis know a lot about America, simply because of America's role in world politics, America's importance for Israel militarily, and because of what you might call the American hegemony in Western culture. Movies, popular music, cable television, basketball. My family and I were living here on a Shabbaton about 10 or 12 years ago. We were living in Baca, and we had a membership at Breakstone Yerushalayim, and we used to go there pretty regularly. And my son was 6, and there was a teenage lifeguard, very cool lifeguard. My son found him fascinating. My son is interested in cool. And now that he's 26, he himself is very cool. Anyway, so I got to talking with this lifeguard who spoke English really well. So I said to him, do you have Anglo parents or one parent? He said, no. I said, my God, the Israeli school system is fantastic. Like, I didn't realize how well you learn English. And he said, nah, it's cable TV. This is American hegemony. So Israelis know a lot about America. But by and large, they know almost nothing about American Judaism or American Jews, aside from some stereotypes or even ridiculous stereotypes. Well, how do I know this? Well, Beverly alluded to it already, talking about her school. We know this for many years when the Israeli Mishlachet comes to work at American Jewish summer camps. And sort of the surprises that they encounter. I'm most familiar with the Camp Ramah system, but it's true in other camps as well. I've had this experience of Israeli kids coming to America after the army and being rather surprised how they were welcomed by these American Jewish communities. They didn't quite get, like, why were they being so welcomed? Because they didn't, that was something a little foreign to them. Now, thanks to something that Eitan mentioned about these textbooks, which are this is very interesting to me. I did know a few years ago when I was working with the Mandel Foundation, we ran a program where we brought a group of American Jewish educators for a seminar for a couple of weeks at the Mandel Leadership Institute here in Jerusalem, and we wanted to do something in which we would look at the way something is taught in America and something is taught in Israel, and then we would have the teachers like compare and etc. And we thought the subject we were going to do was teaching Israel. But the problem was that when we looked for textbooks here in Israel about teaching diaspora Jews or teaching the American Jewish community, we couldn't find any, so we ended up doing this around Bible, which was all very nice, but not what we had in mind. I want to commend to you something kind of hot off the presses done by some person known to many people in this room, and that is Ilan Ezrahi just published a paper, like a booklet, 40-page booklet, published by UJ Federation of New York, in which he reviewed the literature on Israelis' perception of American Jews. He just sent it to me the other day, quite accidentally, not realizing I was going to be talking about that. And it's really quite interesting and kind of confirms a lot of this. I mean, there are some very positive things that Israelis feel about American Jews, but the lack of knowledge is very powerful. How can the gap be bridged? So I would say that there is a knowledge gap on both sides, and that the nature of that gap is different. And there are different challenges on both sides. On the American side, the great advantage for addressing the knowledge gap is that there are well-organized, well-intentioned, and sometimes even well-funded institutional resources in place: Jewish summer camps, Jewish community centers, day schools, congregational schools, etc. And all of them want to do something about teaching Israel. And the challenge on the American side, as I suggested a few minutes ago, is what exactly should that curriculum be about? And this is related to another significant point. I've been talking mostly about knowledge in these remarks, but is knowledge really the goal anyway? What the title of this conference suggests or implies in using the word gap is what I might consider an emotional disconnect, a lack of connection. And isn't the goal instead being about some kind of attachment or maybe even love? I have focused on knowledge of the other because in human history we know a good deal more about how to teach another person some subject matter knowledge than we know how to teach someone how to love something. But by and large, educational institutions are better set up to teach knowledge. I do believe that knowledge can come, that love can come through knowledge. It is not a bad pathway. It's not the only pathway. And I think that the challenge for North American Jews is to find ways to create this linkage of knowledge and commitment, knowledge and attachment. I'd like to add one final thing that I hope might be addressed later on in this conference, what I'd call an ideological component. This is not a simple suggestion, but I'll throw it out anyway. For a long time now, people in Jewish educational circles in America, people that I know, have talked about the need or the desirability for a new vision of Zionism, appropriate in our times, in the circumstances of current realities, appropriate to the American context. I'm not sure that vision will lead to Eitan's 500,000 people making Aliyah, but I think the time has come, and maybe it's even a little bit too late. What will inspire the minds and hearts of young people without dragging out tired notions that work very well for my generation and my parents' generation, but don't have the same magic for younger Jews today? And I would say, on the other side, that I think an interesting and important project here in Israel would be to really take on seriously what does it mean for Israelis to really learn about Jews in the diaspora, and being as the United States is the world's largest diaspora and the wealthiest and probably the most influential, that what it would mean to create a sense of Klal Yisrael as felt on this side of the ocean as much as it is felt on our side of the ocean, so that the gap may be, at any rate, bridged over time. Thank you.
Thank you for those important insights. Dr. David Breakstone is our next speaker. Dr. Breakstone is the Deputy Chairman of the Jewish Agency Executive. He has a PhD from the Hebrew University in Jewish Education and wrote his dissertation on teaching about Israel in the diaspora, and he founded the Herzl Museum on Mount Herzl.
It's time to say that America is a better place to be a Jew than Jerusalem. If ever there was a promised land, we Jewish Americans are living in it.
I wasn't planning to begin with a quotation, but when I heard what Eitan had to say, this quotation from the foreword, I just wanted to say this is nothing new. Professor Jacob Neusner, one of us, wrote that in the Washington Post in 1987, 31 years ago. So if anyone has any doubt that there is a gap after everything we heard, I suppose that quotation from Neusner's piece indicates that yes, indeed, there is a gap. Like the previous speakers, I'd like to describe this gap as I see it, a little differently from the others. Without understanding the nature of the gap, its depth, its width, it will be extremely difficult to bridge it. Just to exemplify this, there definitely is a gap. Let me tell you a little bit about this. Let me tell you about the existing gap without widening it. I've been speaking this year to various people over the past few years. I don't know if you can see here one of the talks I had with my niece. She was on Birthright. It was such a good program. She asked me, Uncle David, I have one question. I don't really get why we need a Jewish state. A nephew of mine, over Passover, I was in the States, and he says the left is against Israel. In other words, he meant occupation is bad, the way Israel relates to the refugees is bad. That's what he was hinting to me. We also have discussions on campus with Jewish activists. I mentioned the Six-Day War the other day. For some of us here in this room, the Six-Day War was, I don't have to tell you, and they say, oh, that's the beginning of the occupation, right? So I see there's a gap, not just between Israel and the diaspora, there's a generation gap between me and my nieces and nephews that we have to cope with. A few months ago, I met with the board of the American Zionist movement. We were talking about celebrating 50 years of the unification of Jerusalem. They said, celebrate, but the city is still divided. And that's an interesting point, too. This city, Jerusalem, has another aspect that I'd like to discuss here today. I was talking to students studying Jewish education. They had been studying at the Pardes Institute here in Jerusalem for a whole year. At the end of the year, I asked them, I said, what's it going to mean for you when you say next year in Jerusalem in the prayers? And they said, I don't understand what you're asking. That Jerusalem has nothing to do with this one. For them, Jerusalem, even after living here for a whole year, was something totally different from the actual physical city they were living in. I met with the president of one of the biggest Zionist movements in the U.S. We discussed Zionism, and he said to me, 99% of my friends are pro-Israel, but if I ask them if they're Zionists, they sort of shrug. Few will say they're Zionists. What's even more problematic for me is that one of the leading philosophers of teaching about Israel in the U.S., when we discussed these questions, he said to me, we don't think Zionism is a useful term.
Zionism is a helpful term.
Oh, wait just a minute. There are comments from the audience here. We'll get to that in a minute. I tried to hold a conference on Jewish Zionist education here in Jerusalem. I went to the States to try to market this idea. I met with some of the leading figures in American Jewry. One person said, stop talking about the centrality of Israel.
Stop talking to us about the centrality of Israel.
Stop talking about the centrality of Israel in American Jewish life. It isn't. It's integral at the most. We had a very interesting discussion on this point. She is presenting an ideological or maybe a sociological perspective. We don't have time to go into that right now. In the end, it wasn't a conference of Zionist education in Jerusalem. It was supposed to be Zionist education in Jerusalem. In the end, it became Israel and the development of Jewish identity, and it took place in Chicago. I said, fine, I'll go to them. We'll discuss it there. During one of the workshops, I was dialoguing with one of the leaders of a center. I was saying something about diaspora Jews, and he said, stop referring to us as diaspora Jews. We're Jews who live in North America, just as you are Jews who live in Israel. It's quite possible that this is quite true. I surmise that most Israelis sitting right here in this room find this extremely problematic, and if it isn't problematic in the U.S., that's part of the gap that exists between us. I said it's not a value judgment, God forbid. I'm not talking about exile, it's the diaspora. Look, there was a center and people dispersed. She said, no, that's not the case. This attack on the centrality of Israel is growing stronger and stronger when we we hear more and more about peoplehood education. The harder it becomes to cope with Israel and all the problems involved, people went instead over to peoplehood education. I think that's what happened. This book came out quite a few years ago now, and it discusses the ideal Jewish peoplehood educated. What I'm interested in, some of it is up here, some isn't. Note that, let me just find my place here.
Okay, we got to go back.
Trying to navigate the PowerPoint presentation. Please remind the speaker to get back to the microphone. There's no commitment to the State of Israel. The State of Israel doesn't exist among those characteristics. The ability to use peoplehood language, but nothing about Hebrew language. The purpose of peoplehood education is to instill a sense of collective belonging, commitment, responsibility to the Jewish people, and the future of education and civil education. I'm sure we all agree with that. Where is Israel in all this?
The centrality
of Israel needs to be revisited, reinterpreted, and rearticulated. In other words, rejected. For me, this is a problem. I'm one of the people who wrote the Jerusalem program that was adopted by the WZO, the World Zionist Organization, and it says the unity of the Jewish people and its bond to its historic homeland,
to its historic homeland, the
centrality of the State of Israel, and so forth. That's the gap. Now what do we do about it? Eitan was more modest. He said he wouldn't aspire to tell Americans how to teach about Israel, but I do want to take 2 or 3 minutes and present my model. Part of the problem is it's our fault. We taught Zionism. We talked about Zionism. We said a haven for the Jewish people. For many, many years, we went to the U.S., all over the world, raising funds. We wanted political support to help us build that haven for the Jewish people. But Zionism, from its very inception, talked not only about a haven, but about a homeland. And we simply forgot to tell our friends overseas that besides being a haven, we want a homeland. We want to build our national homeland. So let me skip if I don't have enough time. Let's forget about the haven, the new generation, young people that we want to interest despite anti-Semitism in Europe. This is not going to make them come here, and we don't have to focus on that in future. We are building our homeland, our national homeland. We are in the process of doing that. A few things must interest us: the people of Israel, the land of Israel, and the Torah of Israel. So much of what happens in our country, here in Israel today, focuses on controversy around those issues. Who is a Jew, the land of Israel, within the Green Line, outside the Green Line, the Torah. Even if we could all agree what exactly does it mean to keep Shabbat halachically, we still need to ask what the role of halacha, what the role of Torah is in our state. It was mentioned here before, that we asked for economic and political support from Jews overseas. It's no less important to get spiritual support from them. You talked about the TALI schools. You talked about these principals who would be doing some time in the U.S. I'm sure they'll bring back a lot of thought that will be helpful to us to enrich our conversation about these three issues, less about Israel as a state and more about my connection to the state of Israel, to the land of Israel, to Torat Israel, the Torah. How are these things different here in Israel from the place I live in? I, as a Jew living overseas, I need to find my place. Where do I belong? Where do I fit in? We need to find common ground, a common language. We need to find a shared purpose, joint responsibility, mutual concern, commitment to basic values. We have to build up the bridge that will bring us together and diminish the gap. This looks like a home. It's right over my shelter. There are many different ways of building a home and many different ways. We need to find the ways of engagement that will interest Jews overseas to help us design our state and give it form according to the way we decide what it means, the peoplehood, the land of Israel, Torah. This engagement is not a one-way street. It goes both ways. We have to learn from them. They should be learning from us how together we can construct these three areas for mutual benefit. Thank you. Thank you, David, for these remarks, these important remarks. We do have a few minutes for questions. Let's take a few questions from the audience here. And please state who you are addressing. Everybody, I guess. My name is Avi Novis Deutsch, the Dean of the Beit Midrash at the Schechter Institute. This is somewhere between an insight and a question. When the Biton Committee was established, one of the problems I was thinking about is why we don't think about American Jewry. When I went through the Israeli school system, I learned nothing about American Jews that is equal in size to the population of the entire state of Israel. In fact, it was even bigger at the time. And I'm wondering, what can we do about it? Is this some kind of purposeful act on the part of someone? Why does the Israeli education system simply ignore American Jews and American Jewry? We'll collect a few questions. Let's pass the microphone around. Shalom, my name is Doron Rubin. I'm the chairman of Marom, the Young People's Forum of the Masorti movement, and I work in the partnership division of the Jewish Agency. I'd like to ask about older people. My mother always quotes George Bernard Shaw and says education is wasted on the young. Today in our reality, and some of the speakers mentioned this, the most significant decisions are not made on the part of 12, 13, or 15-year-olds. They're made by people who are 30 or older. Where do we connect to that here in Israel as Israelis and as American Jews? One more question. My name is Debbie Weissman. I used to work in this important and distinguished institution. I have a few questions for Eitan. Our rabbi said A wise man learns from everyone. I was a little disappointed about the story of the principal who doesn't want to learn from everyone in every context. The other thing, you presented a situation where in Canada, intermarriage is much higher than everywhere else. But that goes against everything we study about modern Judaism. The Canadian model is closer to Australia. Have things changed so much over the past 2 years? It's just impossible. I'd like you to check that again, those figures on your slide. Let's ask each speaker to respond, and please be as brief as possible. Let's go in opposite order. Yeah, that's okay. With the Jewish Federations of North America, we began now a new enterprise on a large scale, conducting meetings between young people, Israelis and Jews in North America. It was obvious that if we wanted to change something here in Israel, we absolutely had to ensure that this kind of encounter took place. I don't have time to go into all the details of the program. We're talking about youth movements, the pre-military academies. They certainly stress this aspect of getting to know young people overseas. Eitan spoke about that TALI textbook that addresses this issue. No less important is what we do with Israelis, with Jews overseas to get encounters there. There are several people here in this room who were emissaries on the part of the Jewish agencies. Israelis come back as Jews. We'll be hearing more from Yizar Hess later. I don't know if he would be the director of the Masorti movement in Israel had he not been on Shlichut in America. They come back as Jews. They leave as Israelis and come back as Jews. Many Israelis go to do a stint in communities in Europe, in South America, in the US. We find it less important to get their contribution over that year that they spend in the U.S. It's more important for them to be our ambassador of goodwill when they go back to Israel. I'm talking about young people who go to summer camps and come back here to Israel. 200 teachers who go as shlichim. These are important projects to bring about an encounter between young Israelis and the reality in North America.
I want to make two comments. One, just reacting to something Debbie Weitzman said. I think it's a really interesting question to explore. What can the two cultures learn from one another? And I don't think it's simple, because the context, as has come out here already, the contexts are very different. And Arnie Eisen even said this in his opening remarks about the Jews in North America are a small minority. They don't have, there's not a government. It's hard to say who speaks for the Jews of North America. One can find quotations from various people, but nobody is actually speaking for the community. It's all voluntary. And yet, at the same time, I think it would be an appropriate and I think wise way of thinking to say these two communities have what to learn from one another. And this is not the occasion to go into that, but I have some thoughts about that. But the other thing is I wanted to relate to something that came out in David's slides that struck me as really also an interesting thing to think about, aside from just being upset about it, and that is, what is this word centrality mean? I mean, what does that really mean? It seems to me there's, and I'm not saying that to say, oh, I reject it. I don't know what it means. We throw that term around. There's no kind of deep philosophical dive into that. And I think that would be important because of the way it's coming up in some of the findings you have in these interviews that you've conducted. That's very interesting to me.
Okay, תודה בארי. Beverly, בבקשה.
Okay, I'll just relate to the one question that I know about. Why does Israeli education ignore North American Jewry? The Israeli curriculum ignores mostly everything right now and is political. Hours have been cut. The day is shorter. I'm just talking about in the 19 years I'm in it. And right now, it's about 5 points math and about STEM, high tech, because the perception is that the economy of the country is what's most important, not necessarily the culture or the humanities that we also have with us, and that's what the push is. And I can give many examples. When they send you money to teach math, and they don't send you money to teach history, you got to teach math. But more serious reason is I think that Israeli educators actually are afraid of the seduction of what's known, what everybody spoke about, the hegemony of culture that we know from television, and also if Israeli kids would get to know the richness of religious life, the full spectrum that is possible if you're there and not here. And whereas we in this room think that that could be enriching to learn about it and create some kind of bridge, but that keeps the ones who are here physically here, I think that there are Israelis who are worried about the pull to there. It is not a secret that there are Israelis, young people living in Berlin, and want to go to Singapore because the taxes are less and they're high tech, and there are big issues here. But I do think that if there had to be a tikkun ladavar in the last 19 years, you mentioned the Beaton Commission, the tikkun ladavar had to be about North African and Middle Eastern Jewry, and we're not there yet because nothing was taught about them, and they're most of the Jews here. And what's more important than understanding about North American Jewry if you have to do an order of priorities. And then I'll say one last thing, and maybe Sharansky's going to be here. Avital gave her first interview in many, many years on television, and she gave it because he won the Israel Prize, and now he's going to retire, and she spoke about what she did when he was in prison. And then people began to remember that the children we're teaching don't know a single thing. He said they don't know a single thing about what we went through. Now, that was a decision because maybe he'll say something different, but because the 1.5 million Russians who came here wanted to integrate into the society. But here, look at somebody my age. That was my entire life. Haskell Lookstein told me that I personally brought 1.5 million Jews out of Russia. And I haven't yet told my students about it. So there's a lot they don't know.
Okay, תודה רבה, Beverly.
So about your question, Avi, first of all, I want to join what my colleague said, that the Beaton Commission was sensitive to the North Africans who live in the State of Israel. It's very important to Israel. And second, your concerns about the American Jews, and that reminds me of a story that I heard a few years ago. I met a person who was about to establish the Morashah organization, and he was talking about how painful it was to him that children in Israel don't learn about Rabbi Massas, so we have to establish schools schools that will focus on the legacy of Rabbi Massas. And I said that you are very advanced. You're talking about how painful it is that the children in Israel don't know who Rabbi Massas is. And I said, I wish that the Israeli children would know who Rabbi Akiva is. And you've gone as far as Rabbi Massas. So before we talk about American Judaism, let's talk about learning Judaism. So before all of the reforms in the Ministry of Education and all of the recommendations and the new program, the new curriculum, just to understand, today in grades 3, 4, 5, and 6, 5 hours of there are 5 hours of Judaism in those 4 grades, and that is what the State of Israel dedicates to Jewish studies in its official curriculum, and that is already significant progress. So, with all due respect to American Jewry, there are basic principles that are lacking. And I agree with Dr. David that we don't have to burden the education system with everything that is important to be learned. There are many other organizations, there are many other frameworks. The pre-IDF programs are a perfect place to learn about these things. There's a limit to how much we can include in schools. About your comment, I am convinced that this principal has I'm sure that this principal learned something from this tour. I think her problem was ideological. She said, Eitan, I'm angry about things that I heard and that I saw, and she said very critically that I don't want to learn anything from them. But I'm sure that she learns a lot from them, but it was very ideological. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. We have to end this fascinating session. Thank you to all the speakers for their very important lectures. Thank you.